Generation X is often called the forgotten generation, not because they lacked impact, but because they learned early not to ask for attention. Born roughly between the mid-1960s and early 1980s, Generation X grew up in a world that was changing faster than anyone was ready for. They were raised between two realities: the old world of stability and structure, and the new world of uncertainty and disruption. Psychologically, this shaped them in ways that still define how they think, trust, work, and love. Many people from Generation X grew up as latchkey kids. Parents worked long hours. Divorce rates were rising. Supervision was minimal. They learned independence not as a choice, but as a requirement. If something went wrong, you figured it out. You didn't call for help. You adapted. This created one of the core psychological traits of Generation X: self-reliance. They don't expect systems to save them. They don't assume stability will last. They trust themselves more than promises. Generation X also grew up watching institutions fail. They saw layoffs, economic shifts, broken social contracts. So optimism was replaced with realism. Psychologists often describe Generation X as skeptical, but it's not cynicism. It's pattern recognition. They learned that authority doesn't always deserve trust. That loyalty isn't always rewarded. That security can disappear overnight. This is why many Gen X individuals value autonomy over status, freedom over titles, competence over recognition. They don't need applause. They need control over their own lives. Emotionally, Generation X was raised in a time when feelings weren't openly discussed. Parents didn't ask how you felt. They asked if you were doing your job. So Gen X learned emotional containment. They feel deeply, but they don't display it easily. Psychologically, this can look like emotional distance, but underneath is resilience. They learned to manage emotions internally because external support was limited. This is also why Generation X struggles with vulnerability. Not because they don't want connection, but because they were trained to survive without it. They grew up before the internet, before constant stimulation, before digital identity. They remember boredom, and boredom taught creativity. They remember silence, and silence taught reflection. They weren't raised to document life. They were raised to live it. Then suddenly, technology arrived, and Generation X had to adapt again. They became the bridge generation. They learned the old rules and the new ones. They understand analog patience and digital speed. This makes them uniquely flexible, but also deeply tired. Because adapting constantly comes at a psychological cost. Generation X also has a complicated relationship with work. They watched their parents sacrifice everything for jobs that replaced them anyway. So they don't romanticize careers. They work hard, but they don't believe work loves you back. This is why many Gen X individuals value balance quietly, not through slogans, but through boundaries. They don't need to announce self-care. They just disappear when they need space. In relationships, Generation X values loyalty, but not dependency. They want partners, not caretakers. They learned early that no one is coming to rescue you, so they don't wait to be saved. They respect strength, but they distrust trauma. They prefer consistency over intensity. Psychologically, Generation X is often misunderstood as detached or cold, but in reality, they are cautious. They were shaped by instability, so they build lives that minimize surprise. They don't chase trends. They don't overshare. They don't perform emotions. They observe. They assess. They choose carefully. And while younger generations are often praised for openness and expression, Generation X carries something just as valuable: emotional endurance. They know how to keep going without applause, without validation, without reassurance. They didn't grow up believing life should be easy. They grew up believing life should be handled. This doesn't mean they are unfeeling. It means they are grounded. They don't expect perfection. They expect reality. And that's why conversations with Generation X often feel different. They listen more than they speak. They don't exaggerate. They don't compete for attention. Their confidence isn't loud, it's earned. They are the generation that learned to survive change without losing themselves completely. And maybe that's why they don't need to prove who they are. They already know. Generation X doesn't ask to be understood. They just keep going. And in a world obsessed with visibility, that quiet strength might be their most defining trait.